What do you know about politics? What should you know? Forget views, beliefs, and opinions. Politics is really a science, and that's where we come in. Welcome to Inside Political Science. I'm Kirby Gordell.
I'm Todd Kent, and we're your guides to what's actually happening in politics. We're using our years of experience to navigate political data, media, money, behavior, and more to educate and inform you.
Welcome to episode 13, lucky episode 13. Todd, we're 6 weeks until Election Day. Not as much time left anymore. We're getting closer and closer. What's the thing you're paying attention to?
Well, I was looking through the numbers this morning and looking at various polls. And one thing that struck me is how few undecided voters there really are out there.
Yeah.
If we believe that the polls are capturing that, there's just not that many who are undecided. The polls are amazingly close. So I think it's going to, the race, in my opinion, is going to turn on other things, how well you can get out your voters. Maybe even interesting, we haven't talked that much about it, how good is the Senate candidate running in your state? Will that Senate candidate help drive voters for one or the other presidential candidates? So maybe there's some other variables that we can think about.
Yeah, you almost wonder, who are these undecided voters? Trump's been around for ages now, and surely you have an opinion on Trump or not Trump. Kamala Harris is a little bit more questionable. There was there was an editorial earlier saying they thought the election was going to turn on how Kamala Harris defines herself and whether voters want to support her or not, because voters already know Donald Trump and already have strong opinions about him, but maybe they're still a little unsure about her. And you're right. One of the key questions I think that we always have to think about is voters aren't just deciding who to vote for, they're deciding whether or not to turn out at all.
Exactly. And that's why, having worked in the electoral process for many years, it's how good is your ground game? How good is it your door to door? How have you identified voters throughout the campaign, and then do you have a mechanism to get them out to vote? And that becomes extremely important, especially now where so many states have moved to early voting that lasts from 5 to 30 days, and so some states are already voting. So have you done a good job with that part of the campaign? If not, you're going to be in trouble when it comes to Election Day.
Yeah, you mentioned early voting. One of the things that I think is really interesting about how early voting changed campaigns is campaigns used to be very structured around Election Day. Everything comes together on Election Day. There are still voters who like to go out on Election Day. I like to go out on Election Day. I like to see what turnout looks like. I like to feel like I'm part of the process. But if you are a campaign now, instead of targeting Election Day, a lot of times you want your voters to go out and vote as soon as possible so they don't change their mind. So if there's an October surprise, you don't lose voters. Early voting really changes a lot of calculations on the part of candidates and campaigns, right?
Yeah, I think the kind of the research from past elections, Republicans like to vote on Election Day. I don't know why, but I think they're realizing that that's not a great strategy. Democrats have always been better about getting out early and voting, and so what you would see is early voting on a tight race. Democrats would win the early vote, but then it would get tighter as the day went on. So I think you're seeing both campaigns now move to try to get their people out as fast as possible.
Yeah, one of the things that I noticed, or one of the things that I've been paying attention to along these lines is Georgia just decided that they would require hand counting of votes. One of the controversies around 2020 was how quickly we got election results. And one of the challenges with getting election results quickly is we don't have a standard for voting in the United States. We have 50-plus standards for voting in the United States. And that creates a challenge in terms of actually counting the votes over time because there are all these different rules in place.
Yeah, and I like to tell my students, we can land a rover on Mars, but we can't count elections very well. It seems like I think the issue is ballot security or voting security. People every day you hear about a hack into your your passwords have been hacked or your information has been hacked, and people then attribute that to voting also, whether or not it's true. So I think what you're seeing in Georgia is this attempt to at least symbolically say we're going to go back to the old way and just count the paper ballots. But like you have mentioned before, that's gonna create some delays. It's not going to be what everybody thinks it's going to be.
Yeah, and it is there's a negative to it. We don't know the election result right away because we don't have a single national standard, because we're not voting in a national election. We're voting in a series of state elections. But there's a positive too, going back to the idea about election security. It's hard to hack our elections because you can't just hack into a single national election site. You need to hack into a lot of state sites if you're going to be,
Right.
and unless you're just focusing on the battleground states. Maybe the hackers are focused on Pennsylvania too. I don't know. but that federalism and the difference in rules provides some level of security against an easy hack against the political system. But it also creates this weird dynamic during 2020 when there were concerns about, were the elections held correctly. I thought, oh, this is going to go poorly because I don't think most voters understand just how different it is to vote from state to state, all the way from how you cast the ballot to how the ballots are counted to how early you can vote to how easy it is to get a mail ballot. The differences across states are remarkable.
And that technology, even where you're running a piece of paper through a scanner and it's counting the votes is problematic. Just if the machine breaks down,
Yeah.
then you're there overnight, and sometimes you're days in to try to get the results. So it is an area where I think the U.S. we need to improve. We need to get better. But you're right. It's 50 elections in 50 different states. There's no federal elections. Even though we have federal candidates on the ballot, so it makes for an interesting dynamic, and I think other nations look at us and can't figure out why it takes us so long.
Well, and I'll go ahead and make a bold prediction. We won't know the winner on election night.
No, I would agree with you there. I remember waking up not knowing if Richard Nixon had won the presidency, and we waited several days to try to get the final results. So I think you're exactly right. It's going to after in 2020 there was this discussion of the overnight the votes changed overnight. I think we're going to see it's kind of the same type pattern because it's just going to take a long time to get it done.
Yeah. One of the things I've been thinking about since last we talked, a second assassination attempt on Donald Trump, and it feels like my students have asked, and they've said, are we in a more violent period? Is violence more likely? Is political violence more likely today than it's been in the past? We can talk a little bit about that. I'm not sure what I think about the right answer, but it feels like we're sitting on a powder keg.
Yeah, it seems like there's more things that I hate to even think this word, that more acceptable. We're more numb to extreme actions. The fact that you could have a candidate in the series of a few weeks be an attempted assassination should be what's driving the news, and it's not, and that's interesting to me.
Well, and our language has become problematic, right? And Donald Trump has pointed to Democrats and said, what do you expect if you say over and over again that I'm a threat to democracy? This is the type of thing that you might expect would result from that. Of course, he's not exactly the most nonviolent in his rhetoric. Is that the right? That's not the phrase that I'm looking for, but he's not shied away from sort of very aggressive. My opponent isn't just my opponent; they are the enemy. They want what's bad for America. So he's also part of the problem. But our rhetoric has become more problematic and more willing to paint the other side as evil.
No, I agree. I think that has increased. It would be something that would be interesting to do the research on. But I think we've gotten to this point where we use words we wouldn't have used before.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's happening. In fact, this week they released a letter that presumably came from the the gentleman or the person in Florida who was at the golf course talking about how basically making the argument that Trump was problem, or he was hurting our who we are as people, and he was a problem, and this kind of ideas, and it was very close to some rhetoric that you'd heard on TV.
Hmm. Yeah, but the bigger question, and if you take a step back, it does feel like there's something different going on because of language, because of media, because of the way we talk about politics, because of the way we dehumanize the opposition, because of effective polarization, where we dislike the other side more intensely than in the past. But if sort of thinking about it historically, I think, oh, well, if you go back to the 60s, there were lots of assassinations and lots of violence and lots of riots and lots of I'm not sure that overall political violence is worse, but again, it feels like we are setting the stage for a more violent future. And when there are a number of different ways that people have tried to test this, and they've tried to look at it in polling data. Are people more supportive of political violence? All those questions are a little problematic, but it does seem like there is at least a subset of Americans who feel like, if the elections don't work, maybe we have to take matters into our own hands.
Right. I don't know if violence has increased, but I do believe that the words we use have changed. We're much more willing to say extreme things about the opponents. So now, whether that leads to violence, it is. I don't believe in that we've had a candidate, an attempted assassination on a candidate in my lifetime. We've had a assassination of a president, but
yeah.
I mean, so this is another level. And what was surprising is even the students had brought this up, how why anybody talking about this?
Yeah.
Is if your opponent is being there's an assassination attempt against your opponent, shouldn't you respond and say something about it? And just how that there's almost been a acting like it didn't happen.
Yeah, yeah. At the same time, as part of the language and part of the way we talk about politics has changed, there also seems to be I think there's this belief that politicians have always lied, and I guess to some degree they have, but there are lies, and there's misinformation, and there's other types of misinformation. What we see is a willingness maybe for the candidates to embrace misinformation in some cases in order to advance. So, I'm thinking specifically here about Springfield, Ohio, and the question about abducting pets and eating dogs and cats, and how that. Well, if this brings attention to the immigration issue, J.D. Vance said, then okay, we need to bring attention to the immigration issue. That's changed a little bit too, don't you think?
I do. I think, and I think we're entering in if we're going to continue debates, I think we need a situation where we get the candidates themselves to fact check. Instead of the moderators, you know what I mean? Where if you say something, then I have the opportunity to question that.
Yeah.
Because I think that brings a lot more kind of openness to the issue, and I think it also keeps candidates from maybe saying things that just for attention.
Yeah, and the other challenge is in a social media age, the misinformation is not necessarily a bad thing for a political cause, because what you want to do is you want to attract attention, and you get repeated attention on the issue. So if you are the Trump campaign, bringing attention to the immigration issue is a net positive for him, probably, even if the way you get there is not ideal from a democratic theory standpoint.
So what do you think about this, that the use of misinformation is not as hurtful for your campaign as it was in the past? It used to be that when something was said, you had three basic television networks that could comment on it. Now everybody gets their news from somewhere different.
Yeah.
And many of the young people, those under 35, are getting it from social media. So and they're going to sources that kind of fit within their own ideology. So misinformation actually is not as harmful to the candidate as it used to be.
Well, and I think that it reflects sort of what we've seen over time is a decline in political trust and a growth in cynicism. And so there's this belief, I think, that's, everybody does it. And they're doing it too. So what's wrong if my candidate does it? And so I think we're way more willing to forgive violations if they come from our own side, and this fits in with the broader pattern of political polarization and effective polarization, all things we've talked about. But when you have those, when you're very polarized, it's much easier, I think, to say, yeah, they said it, but it's my team, and what about what your team said?
Right.
And this whataboutism, it becomes problematic. And what we've seen over time, I think, is an erosion of a social norm. Now, we always knew that candidates were going to exaggerate, right? Like I might say the conservative candidate is going to throw everybody in jail, and the Democrat might, or the conservative candidate might say, oh, they're going to take all your money and give it away to poor people. And so we always expect a certain level of exaggeration, but it seems different. It feels different, and I think it's different both in degree and kind in terms of what we're seeing in today's campaigns.
And I wonder if that stems from this need to symbolically do the things that you need to do for your base. Because it seems like both candidates are campaigning to their base. We don't see that many efforts to reach across to say, I agree with him on that or agree with her on that. We don't hear that. And so I think it's the efforts are, I need to say things that are keep my base strong and get them out on election day.
Yeah, and that is we need turnout, right? And we're probably not going to persuade many people on the other side. What we can do is we can create enthusiasm and excitement on our side. And if we create enthusiasm and excitement on our side, our team will turn out on a higher rate on election day, and we'll win the election.
No, I think that's exactly right. Maintaining that enthusiasm, and here we are 6 weeks out, and there's not that many undecided voters. There's a few.
Yeah.
But most of the time that we would expect those voters to be people who just aren't that interested in the campaign. So it's a really unique time now that it's focused. How do I keep the momentum? How do I keep people enthusiastic about what we're trying to do on either side?
Now, I agree with you, but I'll push back a little bit because of a question a student had after the first debate. She said, We have the debate. We've just had a second assassination attempt, and we've also had a shooting. Why didn't they ask about gun control? And why isn't this a bigger issue in the campaign? And my immediate thought, well, we've seen Kamala Harris say, I own a gun. If you come in my house, I'm shooting you, right? I don't think she wants to make that an issue because she potentially loses some voters. Is she maybe appealing more to the median voter than Trump, but doing so by trying to keep those, because she's also not talking a lot about climate change. She's not hitting on some of the issues that she might have hit on in 2019. Is she maybe playing more of a median voter game than Trump, but by avoiding issues rather than talking about them?
Well, yeah. Then the question is she actually going after that group or trying not to appear so far to the left? You know what I mean? If I can just kind of move over, because I don't think in her mind that her campaign's strategy is we're going to win a lot of pro-gun voters over to our side.
Right.
I think there's just the Democratic Party has been kind of been perceived as the enemy of the Second Amendment rights, whether or not that's fair or not. But so I don't think they're thinking that we're going to win voters. I think what she's trying to do is to move a little bit towards the center so that she doesn't appear to, because if you listen to what Donald Trump's saying, he's saying that she's as far left as there's ever been, the most woke, progressive, and all this. And so I think to kind of take that on a little bit.
Yeah, and she definitely doesn't want to appear to be too far to the left and too far out of the mainstream. And I think that's part of what she's doing on gun control. That's part of what she's doing on immigration. That's part of what she's doing with climate change. Well, that's it for this segment. So when we come back, we'll talk more about getting the vote out.
Howdy, This is Stephen Brugerhoff, your host of Garden Success, a weekly garden show featuring advice and ideas to help you grow a bountiful garden and a beautiful landscape. So join me for Garden Success every Thursday at noon here on Aggieland's Public Radio, KAMU FM 90.9.
On Masterpiece Mystery.
It's about our daughter. She's gone missing. We think it may be because of one of your books.
Chapter 1. Melissa James had made a great many enemies.
Oh, look at this. It's a wicked-looking thing.
Murder has a pattern.
You were the key witness. What did you see?
Moonflower Murders on Masterpiece Mystery.
Welcome back. We're ready to talk a little bit about where the race is and where it's going. And we talked about the fact that we've entered the stage now where we're not trying to, well, I think we're still trying to persuade some voters if they're persuadable, but most people are on sides, and it's all about voter turnout. And you see this already if you look at some of the polls. The polls are jumping around a little bit, and that gives some people a sign for concern. Maybe the polls just don't tell us anything, but I think what the polls are really telling us is that turnout matters, and how you decide to estimate who's going to turn out, who are those likely voters, is going to drive your poll result.
I think that's exactly right. Excuse me. The polls are so close, and I have no reason to believe that when you look at 15 polls, it just shows them within the margin of error. That just says that voters are very evenly split on this presidential race. So it's going to come down to who can get their voters out, and I hope the candidates, as we talked about earlier, have a plan and strategy for that, because there's a lot of things that can happen, and we're talking about where a percentage point in certain precincts can actually change a whole state. So it's very small numbers. This over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've been getting text messages from campaigns with an outrageous question, and we want you to answer yes or no, and they use that to say, okay, is this a person we need to try to get out on election day or not? And I know that all the campaigns are doing that.
Yeah, and I saw some estimates that said, essentially if the election looks like 2016 in terms of voter turnout, Trump wins big in the Electoral College vote. The popular vote, he could still lose, but in terms of the Electoral College vote, he's going to win big if it looks like 2016. If it looks like 2020, even though Biden won, Trump would still win. But if it looks like 2022, when Democrats were more motivated, and that's a post-Dobbs election, and the special elections that have followed since, where Democrats have been very motivated, it looks like Harris wins, and she wins walking away. So the polls aren't wrong. The world's tough to predict, right?
It is. Just watching the news this morning, if you have a strike in a port, and that hurts the economy, if you see the numbers change in any way, that could affect things. Because still, even among Democrats and Republicans, the biggest issue is the economy and inflation. So the jobs and the economy and inflation, and so those numbers between in the next 6 weeks can matter. And maybe it's just 1 or 2 percentage points, but that could change everything.
Yeah, and for the Republicans, I think maybe the challenge is that their voters, the Trump voters, are not always as attentive to politics. At least the core sort of MAGA, the rural voters. I mean, I don't want to stereotype them, but I am going to stereotype them a little bit less attentive to politics. They might fall off in terms of voter turnout, but then also one key demographic for them is young men. And we're looking at some polling data, and it looks like there's a big gender gap between young men and young women. But the advantage that Democrats have there is that young women look like they're more likely to vote, and young men are iffy. And so they're doing things to try to get the young men out. For example, Trump doing a podcast with Logan Paul. Right? Let's try to find the young men and make sure they're excited about my campaign.
The strongest constituency for Kamala Harris is unmarried females. And they're going to vote in big numbers, and they tend to skew younger, and that is a big issue. Whereas the single males, even though they trend slightly towards for Trump, can they actually get them out to vote? So I think it's a new way of campaigning now, where you're looking to influencers to try to influence the group you're trying to reach, as opposed to going to them yourself.
Yeah, and try to go indirectly into so that, and in some cases, you're going to people who aren't as explicitly political. And we talked in the last episode about Taylor Swift, but there are other folks out there. The goal is hopefully to get people excited about the campaign, get them excited about the candidate, get them to register, get them, I guess we're past registration in most places now, but get them registered and make sure that they turn out on Election Day.
Right, and there, we still have states where you can register on Election Day. So
yeah,
the campaign never stops.
Yeah.
And so I think you're right. We're seeing a shift where it's really the 55 plus market that's watching television news.
Yeah.
And that is seeing a television commercial, but there's a lot going on that we don't ever see. That's aimed at different groups, because you can segment a lot better now than you used to.
Yeah, and you can segment the voter, so the campaigns know a lot about us as individuals, right? And they know, in many cases, they know our purchasing behaviors, they know our political preferences, and so they're able to really target their votes, but then, target their communication messages if they can get a hold of us. And the old ways of doing that, direct mail, phone calls, probably not as effective, so they're having to experiment with social media, with podcasts, with online digital advertising, all these different ways in order to hit the right audience and with the right message, so they can target both who they're trying to reach and the message that they're trying to send.
That's true. And so I was encouraging our students to think about digital marketing as in the future, because it's going to continue to grow. Almost to the student, they'll tell you that everything in their life kind of goes through their phone now. And so I think we're going to see more and more of that. Whereas, when I grew up and watched politics, it was on television, and then radio second in the second market, and third was newspapers. But radio and newspapers, you see this have really slowed down, and even television news is too difficult now when you have 250 stations up at your fingertips when you're a viewer, and so you just turn the channel.
Yeah, and we used to call this the ground game. Does the ground game still make sense? Because when I think about the ground game, I think about you have field offices and you have people in place on the ground, and they're going, especially on Election Day, they're going door to door and they're banging on the door and they're saying, "Have you voted yet? Come on, let's go. Let's get you to the polls. Do you need a ride? How do we get you?" Are they making phone calls and saying, "Do you need a ride?" But is it really a ground game anymore? Is that a good analogy?
It is a good analogy. I think it's so the margins are so close that you need that type of individual face-to-face effort. You have teams of people, canvassers who go door to door and say, we're here, and try to gauge, and then what you do, you have software where you put it into the phone, into your phone. Okay, this person is for us or against us, likely to vote. And then that information then is used when the campaign at the ending time, where they can get them out to vote, or make sure we don't invite this person to vote. So you really work hard on it. So it is a ground game. I think we still see phone calls, but the problem is, there's less and less landlines anymore, and people don't answer their cell phones in the same number that you would answer, or the same rate that you would answer a phone at home. So they have to reach them differently. So I think it's much more cell phone oriented through text messages, and if you can get an email, but it's hard to get an email out of somebody anymore.
Yeah, from my general sense is, and I don't think it's just a general sense. I think it's based on sort of money advantage and other types of advantages, organizational advantages. One of the advantages that Kamala Harris had as stepping in as VP is that she inherited Biden's campaign and largely his team, though she changed his team quite a bit. But that gave her an advantage in the ground game because of fundraising advantages and because of field office advantages and organizational advantages, and that Trump is playing a little bit of catch up on that side?
Yeah, I think the Republicans have been playing catch up for a number of years. You know, where the Democrats were just kind of working that side of it much better than Democrats. I do think they've tried to address some of their shortcomings in this cycle. We'll see if that happens. I mean, you saw in the 2020 election where there were, especially in the urban areas, where the Democrats did very well. They took, where there was an average turnout rate of 25%, and it was up to 75% by the end. They made a door-to-door effort, and I think that's what you're seeing now in these areas that are important yet difficult to reach, where it's the door-to-door that matters, and that's kind of back to the future type of campaigning.
Yeah, it is. It is really interesting that the studies that have been done have sort of universally agreed that there is nothing more effective than an in-person contact. It's even more effective if it's an in-person contact from a friend, from a family member, from someone you know. But having a real human being come and say, "Hey, will you vote?" It turns out that's as effective at voter mobilization. Not as effective, more effective than anything else you can do. Telephone calls don't work as well. Mail doesn't work as well. Television commercials, campaigns, none of that works as well as the old style, the sort of campaigning it's hard not to love.
It's true. In fact, political science research kind of backs that up. This idea that it's hard to persuade a voter today, but the area where there is some persuasion is possible when you have a trusted friend or figure tells you something. Mm-hmm. And so but that's a one-on-one thing. That's why it's really difficult to do in mass, because if you have enthused voters who are going to go out and tell others, that can actually make a difference. Whereas even a well-done campaign commercial on TV may not move any voters at all. Mm-hmm. It's that one-to-one. But how do you make that happen in large numbers?
Yeah, and sometimes people ask, "Does my vote matter?" And I don't know. Does it matter? But the idea that your participation matters a great deal, because we often think of campaigns as these top-down things where the candidate's in control and the campaign team is in control. But a lot of contemporary politics is now bottom up, because it is about exciting a base not just to turn out, but to talk to their friends, talk to their family, get other people to turn out, convince them that this is important, and convince them that this is the person they should vote for. And that type of communication has always, that friends and neighbors, V.O. Key called it friends and neighbors politics, that friends and neighbors politics remains really important, with the one sort of qualification, the one addition: with digital now, you don't have to actually be with the friend and neighbor. You can also communicate through social networks.
Yeah, I would argue that we may know less of our neighbors now than we used to.
Yes,
but we might have more more phone numbers that we can text than we used to. So it's a different way of reaching your neighbors than we did. In the past, you just go out and everybody'd stand on the street and you would talk about things. But now there seems to be less of that in communities, and much more the interaction is digitally.
Yeah, and so the question, I guess, is friends and neighbors politics still work, but how do we define the neighbor? Because the neighbor might not be the person who lives next door, and in fact, you may motivate them to vote for someone to vote for the other side if you put a sign out in front of in front of your house. But the neighbor is the like-minded social network, or the like-minded group of friends who you're communicating with and convincing that politics is important. And back to sort of that initial sort of lead-in. Just voting, if you want to just vote, that's great. We applaud you. We want you to do that. But if you really want to influence the political process, take a few people with you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we see, if you drive through a neighborhood in any city, you'll see that the neighborhoods lean one way or another. It seems to me. Yeah. And so you have this phenomenon we call sorting, where I've chosen to live in this community because people are like me or whatever, and you see a lot of that. So you wonder how much opportunity really is there, and so I think I go back to this idea that the ability to change minds is probably limited at this time of the thing. But the ability to motivate somebody to get up, go to the polls with you is actually something that can change the makeup of your electorate.
And the sorting is a big deal. We have sorted more and more into neighborhoods that look like us. So if you're a Republican, you're more likely to live in a Republican neighborhood. If you're a Democrat, you're more likely to live in a Democratic neighborhood. A couple of cool studies. I think one of them was suggested that if you live in a neighborhood and an opposition partisan moves in and it makes clear that they're an opposition partisan, you start to think about selling. And then one on college students asking about roommate selection and knowing their partisan affiliation and whether that would affect your roommate selection. It turns out it does, and that so that sort of sorting becomes very important in terms of how people are located, but also in terms of neighborhood effects. So one of the things that I love in terms of affecting voter turnout are these, and you may have gotten them, and some of our audience may have gotten them, where they send in, here are your neighbors. They all voted. Right. They're counting on you to vote. I think that's such a great appeal because it's a social pressure to turn out and vote, and that tends to work better than, oh, it's your duty. You should be a good citizen.
Well, and I think it goes back to what we're talking about. How you can do those type of kind of promotional campaigns when you know that 7 out of 10 are going to vote your way.
Yes,
you get the whole neighborhood, and so that's what we see now. It's interesting. I've been looking at the polls about urban versus rural voters, and in the outside the cities tend to be very strong Republican at this point.
Yeah.
Urban areas, very strong Democrat. But what we're seeing is in the suburbs, it's about 50-50. And really, I think, and I know the campaigns know this. And so if you live in a suburb outside of a big city right now, you're probably getting a lot of attention. And because it's so close, and both campaigns know that they need to do well among those voters.
Yeah, and the real battle for the future of American politics happens just outside of the cities and just inside of these rural communities and these suburban areas where people have more mixed views, and also those are the areas where you are more likely to be in a neighborhood that may not be as
right.
uniform in terms of its political preferences. So you may be hearing from people on the other side. So that still does happen. It's just not as common as it once was.
Right. No. So it is. I think we'll continue to see the evolution of campaigning as kind of digital ways of continuing to identify voters and reach them continues to grow.
Now, one of the things we haven't talked about is if you were in charge of one of these campaigns, what would you think about trying to do something to maybe make the other side less excited about voting? I would.
Yeah, I mean, historically, that's kind of been the thing. The reason there's so many negative ads is not to kind of change people's minds, but maybe you'll just say, you know what, I don't like either one. I don't like either candidate. I'm not going to vote. And if you don't vote and you're going to vote for my opponent, that's a win for me. And so this idea, and I don't know if this is where you're going with your question, but I think you will continue to see the kind of the negative ad. And in fact, this morning, if you drinking my coffee, watching the local news station, it was full of negative ads.
Yeah, and I think part of that is if we can, maybe we pull someone to our side with a negative ad, but maybe we also just convince someone who may be leaning to the other side that it's not worth it. They're not really who I thought they were, so I'm just going to stay home. Right. Either one of those is a good outcome for your campaign if you're the one sending that message, right?
And also, when you have candidates that have a lot of high negatives, their message may be, I'm the lesser of two evils. You know what I mean? And so they're really bad, and you may not have been a choice for you originally, but I'm going to be okay.
Yeah, and if we look at the presidential election, since I do think Trump is the the candidate that can move people the least, right? And in terms of his own people, are his supporters are excited about him. They're not going anywhere. They're with him at the top of the ballot. I think they're probably going to turn out. And the real question is about Kamala Harris, and are her voters going to stay excited and stay enthusiastic? She's trying to run a mostly positive campaign and thinking about the future for that reason, right? She wants her voters optimistic and excited about what the future might hold. I think the Trump campaign, if you're advising them, you have to say, you have to dampen that enthusiasm, right?
I think you're exactly right. And I was thinking about this morning. I feel like the Trump campaign has done a poor job of staying on message about defining who Kamala Harris is. I mean, here's a person who really hasn't run in a primary, didn't get any convention delegates, and is now the front runner, and by many polls. But yet people say they still don't know who she is. So it's a failure of the Trump campaign to really define her and to say, okay, look, if the economy is the number one issue, I'm the person that can solve the economic problems, not her. And even though you may not like me as a person, I'm still this. If this is your number one issue, I'm that person. I don't think they've done a good job kind of making that case.
Well, for the audience out there that gets a little, we've talked about how long the American political campaigns are, and for the audience out there that gets a little frustrated with political campaigns, we are moving into that part of the season where your frustration is likely to go up, because we're going to see more negative ads, we're going to see more negative campaigning, we're going to see more efforts to define the opponent, because of we live in this polarized era, and negative campaigns seem to just be part of the process that's ongoing.
I don't think that's going to change at all. I think you're right. I think it's going to grow. And I think from the campaign perspective, you see Election Day as the Super Bowl. It's all or nothing. Yeah. After that, it doesn't matter. So you don't want to have any money left in the bank. You don't want to have any good ideas left on the drawing board. You're going all out. And so I think you're going to see the next 6 weeks going to be it's going to be tough for everybody to kind of walk through that.
Well, we hope our audience doesn't get too frustrated. We hope that they are engaged in participating, and we look forward to continue into seeing how this campaign goes, and to seeing whether it goes in the direction we expect it to go to, and to see what the voter turnout's going to be. That's all we have for this episode. We look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Look forward to it.
Inside Political Science is a production from KAMU, Aggieland's Public Television and Radio. For more information, visit tx.ag/Inside Political Science. Have a question for our experts? Email them at insidepolicy@tamu.edu. Also, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss a new episode.